After 20 years in federal service, I have a specific understanding of how institutional power works, how it's granted, how it's documented, how it's legitimately exercised, and crucially, how to recognize when someone is faking it. That knowledge became relevant on a Saturday morning when two men in dark uniforms showed up at my lakeside cabin and attempted to arrest my daughter. Let me build the context, because it matters. I built the cabin on private land outside any HOA boundary, a deliberate choice after 2 decades working inside government systems that taught me, among other things, exactly how much paperwork human beings are capable of generating when they want to control something that isn't theirs. The property is documented, surveyed, and recorded with the county. My daughter Emma and I spent weekends there maintaining the land, fishing, and doing nothing that remotely invited external involvement. Then Linda Graves moved into the neighboring lakeside community and became its HOA president. I want to be fair in describing Linda. She was effective at her job in a way that certain personalities are effective at organizational leadership, through total commitment to authority and a genuine inability to accept its limits. The moment she learned my cabin sat outside her jurisdiction, something shifted in her. What should have been a simple geographical fact, your boundary ends here, mine begins there, we're done, became for Linda an unacceptable condition that required correction. She started with questions, then came suggestions, then formal demands that my cabin comply with HOA regulations that legally had no application to my property. I showed her county records, property maps, and the survey documentation that established my boundaries with precision. She looked at the documents and continued as though I hadn't presented them. Then the notices started appearing on my cabin door. They were formatted to look official: HOA letterhead, fine schedules, compliance deadlines, language designed to simulate legal authority. Emma noticed the problems first, because Emma is sharp and pays attention to details. The logos didn't match any registered authority. The cited regulation numbers didn't correspond to actual codes. The fine structure was invented. We photographed every notice and filed them in a folder that was growing thicker by the week. I want to pause here and acknowledge something. At this point, I still believe this was a property dispute conducted through aggressive paperwork. Annoying, unfounded, legally baseless, but paperwork. I was categorizing Linda as someone who didn't understand the limits of her authority and was pushing them with bureaucratic tools. I was significantly underestimating her. What I didn't know was that Linda had begun meeting with 2 men who were willing to take her campaign beyond paperwork. The plan they developed together was direct. Send men in uniforms to my property while Emma was there alone, present credentials that looked official, invoke legal-sounding authority, and use a combination of uniforms, badges, and confident aggression to frighten my daughter into compliance. It was a plan built entirely on the assumption that a young woman alone at a rural cabin would not know enough to challenge people who looked like law enforcement. Emma was alone at the cabin that Saturday. She'd driven up early to prepare for a family gathering. Cleaning, stocking the kitchen, opening windows to let in a morning that was, by her account, genuinely beautiful. She had no reason to expect anything other than a quiet, productive day. 2 dark vehicles pulled into the driveway. 2 men in dark blue uniforms approached her with the body language of people accustomed to compliance. Shoulders squared, pace deliberate, expression set to convey authority before a single word was spoken. They identified themselves as HOA enforcement officers. They informed Emma she was being placed under arrest for repeated violations of HOA regulations. Emma asked for their identification. She asked for the specific legal statutes authorizing their arrest powers. She asked for the paperwork documenting the violations they were citing. The men provided what she later described as vague gestures toward badges that, on closer inspection, didn't look right. The design was off. The issuing authority printed on them didn't correspond to any agency Emma recognized. When she asked follow-up questions about the agency structure and reporting chain, the kind of questions that feel natural when you've grown up with a father who spent 20 years in federal service, the answers became inconsistent in ways that mattered. When one of the men moved to take her arm, Emma stepped back and told him clearly that he was not to touch her. What none of them knew, what Linda, arriving in her own vehicle moments later with the visible satisfaction of someone watching a plan execute, what none of them had accounted for, was a security camera system installed at multiple points around the cabin's exterior. High definition, time-stamped, continuously recording. Every vehicle, every face, every word close enough to the cabin's exterior microphones to be picked up. Emma called me. She was calm on the phone in a specific way that people are calm when their adrenaline is high and their thinking is clear. The kind of calm that isn't the absence of stress, but is instead stress being channeled into function. She described the uniforms, the badges, the arrest claim, the agency name on the credentials. I knew within 30 seconds. There is no such thing as HOA enforcement officers with arrest authority in any jurisdiction in the United States. HOAs are private civil organizations. They have no law enforcement powers. They cannot detain people. They cannot arrest people. The badges Emma described did not correspond to any federal, state, or county agency. The men at my cabin were not law enforcement. They were civilians in costumes claiming authority they did not possess. I told Emma to stay calm, avoid physical confrontation, keep them talking, and keep her phone on. Then I ended the call and made different calls, ones that mattered. Federal response time, when the situation warrants it and the right people are notified, can be remarkably fast. 14 minutes after I hung up with Emma, several black vehicles turned onto the road leading to the cabin. Not local units, federal agents, the kind who arrive without lights or sirens, who move with the unhurried confidence of people who know exactly what they're walking into and have the authority to handle it completely. The lead agent approached the group at the cabin and requested identification from everyone present. The two men in dark uniforms produced their badges. The agent examined them briefly, passed them to a colleague, and within moments the assessment was complete and unambiguous. The badges were counterfeit. The agency name printed on them did not exist. The uniforms were purchased, not issued. The authority the men had been invoking for the past 20 minutes was entirely fabricated. Linda, who had been observing from near her vehicle with the expression of someone watching a plan succeed, began the rapid repositioning that people attempt when they realize the ground has shifted underneath them. She hadn't known the officers were fake, she said. She had simply asked them to speak with my daughter. She had no idea they would claim arrest authority. The security footage was reviewed on-site. Cameras had recorded Linda's vehicle arriving before the uniformed men. They had recorded her speaking with both men before they approached Emma. They had recorded her watching the encounter with the specific attentiveness of someone monitoring an operation she had organized. They had recorded everything in high definition with timestamps that established a clear, unbroken sequence of events. The repositioning stopped. Both men were detained on charges related to impersonating law enforcement officers and fraud. Linda was informed that her organizational role in the incident was the subject of an active federal investigation, that the footage, the coordination evidence, and the documentation a month of prior escalation had been preserved and would be examined thoroughly. The HOA community's response was instantaneous. Board members who had attended meetings where Linda had outlined her plans to bring my property into compliance began issuing statements and requesting emergency sessions. Nobody wanted their name attached to what the investigation was surfacing. The organization Linda had run as a personal authority structure was suddenly occupied with the business of separating itself from her as efficiently as possible. Emma and I were back at the cabin the following weekend. The lake was the same. The cabin was the same. The mornings were still quiet in the way that lakeside mornings are quiet, when nothing is competing with the sound of water and birds. We made coffee and sat on the porch and talked about other things. Here is what I want people to understand about the situation. Not just as a story, but as a pattern. The entire scheme Linda constructed was built on a single load-bearing assumption that my daughter, alone at a cabin, would not know enough to challenge people with badges and uniforms. That assumption was wrong. Emma asked for credentials. She asked for statutes. She asked for documentation. She stepped back when someone tried to touch her without authority and said no clearly. And she called me calmly and described what she was seeing with enough precision that I understood the situation completely in under 30 seconds. Knowledge is a specific thing that fake authority cannot survive. Uniforms are fabric. Badges are metal. Arrest authority either exists in documented law or it does not. And when you know how to ask the right questions, the difference between real power and performed power becomes apparent very quickly. Linda spent months trying to extend her control over land she had no claim to, escalating from paperwork to counterfeit law enforcement when the paperwork failed. She picked the wrong cabin. She picked the wrong daughter. She picked, as it turned out, the absolute wrong family.